I want to introduce a personality, a legend of Islam, and that is Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Okay. Now, Abdullah ibn Mubarak is from that Tabi'in era, he's from the Salaf. And from the Atba'u Tabi'in though, but he's from that era with the Tabi'in. He is born in 118 Hijri. And he passes away in 181, just 2 years after Imam Malik. He's very junior to Imam Malik. Uh, he's born in Marwa, I believe, which is in the Nishapur, modern day kind of Iran region. But he goes on to becoming one of the greatest scholars of Islam. Absolutely phenomenal. And he is leading in all fields. He's absolutely killing it. He's amazing in hadith. He's considered Amir al-Mu'minina fil hadith. He has his own madhab, arguably, although it doesn't really expand much. I know the Hanafis try to sometimes put him as a Hanafi. Good old Hanafiya. Huh? They try the occasional snatching, kidnapping ulama. It's like these scholars wake up, they're like, where are we? You're in the Hanafi madhab. So, and he really brings so much to the discourse of Islam. He's known for his teaching of Quran, his teaching of fiqh, his teaching of hadith, and he really not only invests his own life, but was somebody that spent, as well as his time, so much wealth in serving Islam right up until his final moments. So, going to his beginning, where does this light emerge from? Allah. Now, his origin is of Turkic kind of roots. His father was a slave. See, this is another thing. Many of the great scholars of Islam in early Islam came of very lowly, kind of humble origin, social structures. They were from the Mawali, okay, which is plural for Mawla, who were freed slaves. So this, I mean, Mawla can mean, it's one of those words that can also mean protector as well. It's one of those where you can use it as a fa'il or mafa'ul. So ni'mal mawla wa ni'mal nasir. Allah is our Mawla, but it can also be used as we are his Mawla, in the sense that we are under his protection, or like a servant to God. So it has a double kind of meaning to it, the word. So his father was a slave who was owned by this wealthy, very wealthy Khwarizmi individual, this merchant, and he has all these. He's from Khwarizm, that region, up there by that kind of Iranian, going further into kind of Western Asia, Central Asia, that kind of region there. So this person has, he's very wealthy. He's got businesses. He sets up all these. He has fields, and he produces all this produce of fruit and so on, and sells it, and very wealthy. And there's actually an interesting story that he once asks Mubarak, who's the father to be of Abdullah ibn Mubarak, to go get him a fruit from his field. And some say it's a pomegranate or whatever the fruit was. And when he tastes it, it's sour. So he says, it was another fruit. And he says, no, go get me a sweet one. And he brings him another one, and it's sour again. And he does this on a couple of occasions. And he says to him, look, what's wrong with you? I'm telling you, like, surely you must taste my fruits. Like, you must, surely know what they look like. When you're working on my fields, you must eat. So you must have a good idea which fruit is good and which fruit isn't. So He says that I don't. He says, what do you mean? He says, I genuinely, he says, I've never eaten a single fruit from your field. So the person says, why not? And he says, because it's not right. He says, I'm working. For what I work, you pay me. Like I get a certain allowance. For me to take a fruit would be theft. Like, well, why would I do that? This brutal honesty kind of shocks this owner, and he starts to kind of to keep an eye out on him and see how integral is this slave or servant of his. And he finds another interesting thing. He finds that this guy often would just fast during the day. Now check that, on a side note, check this out. See, as a belief system, because this person Mubarak, he was a Muslim. He was of the Turkic origin. He'd become a slave. He'd embraced Islam, as many people had in that era. It was the early expansion era of Islam. He would fast. Now, fasting obviously is for people fast for Allah, but look at one way of looking at it. Is there is a like a richness of heart, because I know I'm fasting, so I'm not going to eat. And if I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to ask somebody for their food. I'm not going to steal somebody's food. I'm not going to have to be dependent or grateful later on, oh, this person gave me food, I'm kind of indebted to this person. In Urdu, there's this term, khuddari. It's kind of self-reliance. Like I don't have to rely on anyone. And khair, like I work, I graft, I do my graft. And I fast. Allah Malik, when it comes towards the end of the day, work's over, I open my fast, I go. There's a mentality to it. One may say, you see, when you look at it from a different perspective, it's so phenomenally powerful as a belief system that it's so dignifying in self-respect. Now, this businessman becomes very enchanted by him in the coming months and time to come, that he has a daughter himself. He just has a daughter, no other child. And as he's getting older, he says to this person that, look, I free you from our contract, whatever, you're free, you're a mola, you're free, I pay you this much. And he says to him, look, I tell you what, I would like you to marry my daughter. So he does. And because he says, I've not seen someone, I travel the world, I do business, but I've not seen someone with such an upstanding character. That who better than that for my daughter? So he marries him to his daughter, and they have a great life. And as he dies, that son-in-law, this Mubarak, inherits all this wealth. Him and his wife Mubarak go on to have a child who is Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Right. So, and he's born in 118 Hijri. Now he's born into great wealth because his father inherits all this opulence, all these, so much money. They're making ridiculous money, right? All the harvests, all the trades, and they've got people working for them, remember? So he makes so much money. Now, Abdullah ibn Mubarak grows up in just sheer opulence. He's so rich. And he chills, and he wasn't actually interested. I say interested. He wasn't really that interested in the Islamic stuff. I mean, he was a Muslim, obviously, grew up like everybody back then. You learned how to read, you studied. All children would have read the Quran. He would have understood the Quran because he speaks Arabic. And you would learn a very small amount, and that's it. But he's got money. He would just chill. Up until into his early 20s, he was just a chiller, a dosser. Somebody had living the lifestyle. He was a great poet. They say he was very eloquent, and he was very charmer. Charm. And he had a hangout spot. He would chill out, hang out there with his mates, and they would spend the whole night. They would drink. They would play the flute. He would sing his poetry sometimes. He would kind of chant his poetry. They would spend the nights chilling. Mojo masti. Has to be done. And yeah. And he had this poem. He had this poem that that he would say, ألم يأني لي منك أن ترحم وتعذل العواذل واللوم. And so that's like one bait, one couplet of it. That ألم يأني لي منك أن ترحم وتعذل العواذل واللوم. And it went on, and yeah, and it goes on, وأقام بعد هجرك المعتمة, and so on, and it goes on and on. He had this poem, and he would sing it, and he was a poet himself. He would write poetry, and he was very impressive. So this one time he was there, and he's drank, he's drunk, and he's chilling in the late night, and it's going right through the night, and he's trying to chant this poetry, but he's getting stuck on the words. So he's saying alam ya'ni. He's like, what's next? And he can't, and it's like, it's on the tip of my tongue. And he's like kind of drifting off, and he's coming back, and he's trying it again, and he's like, I've got it. It's on the tip of my tongue. It says, alam ya'ni li, alam ya'ni. And he's like, yeah, what is it? And then he reads, and he says, and the verse of the Quran comes, alam ya'ni lilladhina amanu an takhsha'a qulubuhum li dhikrillah wa ma nazala min al-haq. Allah. That is it not time? Alam ya'ni. Because the poem that he would read, alam ya'ni li minka an tarhama. That is it not time for me from you that you show mercy. This was his poem. But as he was kind of stuck, and he was in this out of it state, he reads this. Alam ya'ni lilladhina amanu an takhsha'a qulubuhum li dhikrillah. That is it not time for those who have faith, that their hearts finally tremble or crumble in the remembrance of God. وَمَا نَزَلَ مِنَ الْحَقِّ, and what has come to them from truth. This verse hit him so powerfully that he just fell. He was in this, he was in the night out in this spot where he would normally chill. He fell into sujood. And it's as though these verses were being revealed. It's as though this is the first time he's hearing. It's so powerful. It's not a quantitative experience. It's not that he didn't know this verse before, but it's a qualitative experience. He has a mystical encounter. He is so struck by this. They say that he just remains in that spot on the floor, just thinking. And this is known as, I mentioned previously the mystical experience and how William James had quantified certain qualities, and he's the father of modern psychology. And the kind of acronym for them is PINT. That passivity is the first one. Passivity is where you are overcome by something because of it, mysterium tremendum, because of its terrifying glory. This passivity in Arabic we can call khushu'. That is I feel it captures the meaning of khushu', and takhsha'a qulubuhum, that your hearts are overcome. They, in that sense, tremble in the presence of the glory, that they are overcome. This experience, mystical encounter that Abdullah ibn Mubarak has, changes the course of history, both for him and us, because it really goes on to add to the legacy of Islam. He is already in his early 20s. He starts to learn about Islam. He goes to teachers. He starts to study Hadith. He starts to he does he starts to learn fiqh. He spends years first learning, and then eventually he has his own analytic interpretative skills where he comes up with rulings. He arguably has his own madhab, although it doesn't go on so much. He also participates in a lot of what they had, a lot of jihad in that day and age. So this is another thing that, in fact, is a very famous story. And it's interesting because you see another incredibly popular quality of Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Because he comes to Islam, he has so much wealth, and he brings that angle to serve Islam. So one, in his general charitable sense, because he's reminded how important it is to help people. And then in other, so the humanitarian side, and then in the faith arena. So for example, he would help so many people do Hajj. We spoke of Hajj earlier on. If he found out that they were financially unable to go, he would cover their costs. He would, if he found people were studying or scholars, he used to, in fact, Sufyan al-Thawri, he used to give him an annual stipend, an annual kind of salary, just as a patronage for him, even though he disagreed with Sufyan al-Thawri. Sufyan al-Thawri is I mean, it obviously has his own school of law, but that's how he would honor him. Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Sufyan ibn Uyayna praises him to that extent. He's from Mecca. He says that I feel that he had so many virtues of Islam that, I mean, this is an exaggeration, of course. He says that if it wasn't for the Sahaba, that the companions, he said he would have, in terms of virtues, been placed amongst the companions of the Prophet, except he didn't see the Prophet. I mean, that's an exaggeration. But you can see how much people loved him. And they loved him really because it's not just his ilm, it's that his heart was in it. And this is to show you an example. They say that there was this is how much he would give. Because giving, in giving you receive. They say every alternating year he would go on Hajj. And he had this personal thing where he would go 1 year, he would go on a military expedition, he would go on a jihad. And then the following year, he would go on Hajj. And then he would alternate these years. And he was also an incredible, that background he came from, because he was so wealthy and he grew up, he had part of his upbringing, he had trained well. You see, in that day and age, things like swordsmanship, martial arts of that day and age, fighting skills, spear, how to handle these things, because he had luxury. He had the money. So he had trained really well in this stuff. He was like an excellent swordsman. And he was an excellent fighter of like the most elite league you can imagine. Now, he would take every alternating year. And the fighting, to give you an example, there was an expedition that he was on where, the old Arab systems of battle, they had this system which was called Mubaraza, a duelist mechanism. So before a battle would begin, a kind of like a warrior would kind of he would progress, come forward, and from the other side one would come forward and they'd have a duel, and they'd kind of, so this was called Mubaraza. So they almost always did that, the Arabs did. And then if one lost, another could come forward, and they could keep going until the duel ends, whatever, and then they would kind of have charge in. So there was a Mubaraza taking place where they say that the Muslim soldier had kind of gone forward, and you had I can't remember, I think it may have been Roman soldier from the other side, and they say that the Muslim soldier lost very easily. So another one comes forward and he loses. Now, what this would do is it would really dampen the morale. And a third comes forward and he loses. And now you can imagine people are like, what the hell? So there's this known warrior amongst the Muslim ranks. And he comes forward, steps forward and says, I will deal with him. And he goes forward and he's going, toe to toe with this soldier. And it's very close, but he falls to the ground and is defeated. And this almost puts out the light of hope in the Muslim ranks. And they say that at that stage, a horseman comes forward with, mulatham, face covered, and he goes forward and he steps forward for the mubaraza, and the person says, okay, and and he defeats that Roman soldier. And when he does, only a handful of them that were watching, spectators, rush forward. You're not meant to really do that in the Mubaraza, but they say maybe 5 or 7 rush forward. And this covered swordsman takes them all on, defeats them, and then comes back and just disappears in the ranks. And they're all trying to figure out who it is. And this one person says, I followed him, and I thought, who the hell was that? And I go right to, and he goes into his tent and he removes his thing. It was Abdullah ibn Mubarak. I mean, he was known in his day and age for, just to give you an idea. But we were speaking of the Hajj. He was on his way to Hajj and he passes through Sham, and there was a certain area that had been hit by a pandemic several months before, and people in that region were starving. And he goes past, and he sees this woman ravaging through the litter, through rubbish, and she finds some carcass of some small kind of dead animal, and she's taking, and he sees this from a distance, and he goes up to her. He's on his horse. He goes up to her and he asks her, what are you doing? And she says, like, what? I'm just getting something. He says, what are you going to do with it? And she says, I'm going to eat it. He is so hit by this that, ya salam, all of his Hajj money, he gives it to her. And he says it, and like he gives it to her, and he turns back and goes back. He says, Hajj another time. Allahu Akbar. You see, this is why people loved him. He was so, you see, it's because that's what it's about, humanity. It's not about it's you see, the other things everybody admires, but this makes that difference. They say that he, on this occasion, Harun al-Rashid had come to Raqqa in Sham. And when he'd come in, people obviously, they go running, like you get like crowds and crowds of people. And just coincidentally, that day, Abdullah ibn Mubarak was passing through. He too was coming to for something else. He had arrived in Raqqa for something else. When people found out, the crowds ran. They went off. They're like, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, because they knew he always gave. He gave like with such an open heart. He would just give and not even look back. He'd give whatever he had. Such an open heart. And people who have a heart like that, Allah gives them from his unlimited resources. This is and he goes on to spend his years as one of the greatest scholars of Islam. They say, by his deathbed, at his deathbed, because by the way, he's considered Amirul Mu'minina fil Hadith. This is how high he is in Hadith. And they say at his deathbed, people ask him that, who will there be for Hadith after you? You know why they're asking this? Because there was an incident in, I think, with Harun al-Rashid, that they catch a particular person who he'd been up to all kinds of stuff. So they catch him and they're about to persecute him. And he says, so what? You guys think you're so good. He says, I've already fabricated 3,000 hadith and put them into circulation. What a thing. What a thing to get people back, huh? He says, so what? I've already fabricated 3,000 ahadith and put them into circulation. Huh? That's a bit like, there's this story where of this imam, the story from Pakistan, what I heard, that they call this imam to do imama. They said that, what, can you lead Taraweeh and we'll pay you such, X amount of money at the end. So he says, okay, then cool. So when it comes to the end, they say to him that he goes, Yaar wo paise, that money. And the guy says, Kaun se paise? What money? He goes, Yaar wo jo, namaz padhane wale, to lead the salah. That guy says, Yaar wo to maine aise hi kaha tha. I just said that. I just lied. I just wanted you to lead the salah for I just lied. And then he says, acha. He goes, to maine bhi, he goes, kuch din wuzu ke baghair hi namaz padhai thi. He says, well, I'll have you know that there were some days that I led the salah without wudu. What are you going to do about that? Kya baat hai, kya baat hai. This is so this guy had said, look, I've fabricated 3,000 hadith, put them into circulation. What are you going to do about it? And they say that the caliph had asked Abdullah ibn Mubarak as a project, to go out and seek, like, to research because hadith was his forte, and they say he found, this is what they say, 3,000 fabricated narrations in circulation and highlighted them. This is why he was such a don of this field. So on his deathbed, they ask him that, they say, Ya Aba Abdullah, man li hadha al-ilmi ba'dak? Who is there for because remember, he passes away 181. 179, Imam Malik has passed away. See, the great legends have all passed away. So they say, Ya Aba Abdullah, man li hadha al-ilmi ba'dak? who is there to serve this knowledge after you? And he says, يَعِيشُ لَهَا الْجَهَابِذَ. Allah. Said legends will be born for it. Legends. Allah. You see, all in good time, that Allah has a divine algorithm at play. It's amazing, this. And speaking of dreams, we spoke earlier, they say that somebody saw Imam Shafi'i in a dream after his death. Imam Shafi'i is junior to Abdullah ibn Mubarak and passes away a few decades after him. He passes away in 204 Hijri. So they say that they saw Imam Shafi'i and they ask him, what came of you in the afterlife? And he says, Alhamdulillah, it's amazing, in a state of bliss. And they ask him in the dream that, what about Abdullah ibn Mubarak? He says, Abdullah ibn Mubarak is in the divine presence of God. Allah, as in he's way ahead of us. That he was such a legend of Islam. Yeah, I'll tell you an incident. We'll wrap up. He had a great, the thing about him is, and you find this with a lot of the tabi'een, they had a great sense of humor. You find that as time moves forward, the scholars start to diminish their humor and they start to become more kind of very serious all the time. But in the Salaf era, the Tabi'een especially have a great sense of humor. You find people like Sha'bi and all these people, Abdullah ibn Mubarak and all these, Imam Abu Hanifa, and all these guys have a great sense of humor. They always like tongue-in-cheek saying stuff, and they're being like proper, but they'll say things and maybe not everybody will get it, but some people might get the joke. So yeah. So there's an incident where you see, because he studied with Imam Abu Hanifa loads, and he did take from him, although he traveled and had his own views, he didn't restrict himself to Imam Abu Hanifa's teaching. But there's an incident much later. He comes back because he travels a lot. You see, he's very wealthy. He goes around, travels around, and he comes back to Kufa on this particular incident. And he's praying. He meets Imam Abu Hanifa and he's praying next to Imam Abu Hanifa. So both of them are praying. And so they're praying their salah and everything. And so when they finish, Imam Abu Hanifa has like a smirk. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak looks at him and he says, like, Mabit, he says, what's up? He says, what's up with you? Like he asked Imam Abu Hanifa, what's up with you? And Imam Abu Hanifa says to him that, he says, he says, Aturidu an tatir? He says, are you because Abdullah ibn Mubarak does all the Raf' al-Yadayn. Abu Hanifa says, are you trying to fly away? Are you trying to flap so you can, like, are you trying to fly away? Aturidu an tatir? Like, meaning, is that like your wings, you're trying to fly? So, so some people burst out laughing. And then he obviously replies, like he says, well, he says, Illam atir fil ula, lam atir fil bawaqi. He says, if the first one doesn't help me take off, then I'm sure the others are fine as well. But this was their kind of banter. They didn't really, they didn't take these things too hard. Unlike, unfortunately, people afterwards who missed the spirit that these people had. But they were great, legends, really. So I hope that's of some inspiration. But one of the major things you can learn from that, if I could say two lessons that really anchor this great personality, one is his living example of giving. He had this heart that really just They just shone, they were just light that he would give wherever he could. And the other was understanding that all in good time. He was somebody well into like he had reached his 20s. He was not somebody who was interested in Islam or that kind of legacy. He was a poet. He was, living a luxurious kind of lifestyle, enjoying, chilling. But it wasn't by preaching. It wasn't by somebody telling him, you need to pray, you need to do this, alcohol is haram. It was a realization, this noetic quality, this ilm. It's not information. It's an understanding. So no new information was added to him. It was a realization. And that happens in its own time. And Allah gives to whom He wills. I hope that's been of some help. So shukran for that.